Please put your hands together for Simon Frazier.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam, and thank you for having me, and thank you for coming along this morning. So, everything's going on there. So, I'm going to be talking a little bit of a presentation called Making Sense, the Commercial Media Landscape in 2024. So, there are some slide transitions to make it a little bit more interesting, because they are quite heavy on the old data. So, anyway, by introduction, Making Sense, the Commercial Media Landscape, we launched that report back in 2019. And it gave for the industry, for the first time, a kind of a single source data set which showed the evolution of commercial media and also the capability of looking at all media on a side-by-side basis. Well, that was the first edition notwithstanding. That was a kind of a Gerald Ratner moment in my career. That one didn't go down so well, so we kind of forget that one. But since then, we've had 4 more editions that seem to have been fairly well received. So today we're going to try and break down what shifts are occurring in commercial media usage and outline where we should be focusing our attention to drive success in the years ahead. The data you'll see comes from 18 years of analysis of the IPA's touch points, commercial media usage data. And actually, despite the idea that everything from 2020 to 2022 was unprecedented, I actually think in terms of commercial media and what's happened and what's changed and evolved, we've got a lot more precedent than we ever thought possible from the last 300,000 years of humans walking the earth. Just as a caveat, that's Homo sapiens, not including Australopithecus or Homo habilis. Those guys just massively over-index for out of home, so we don't include them. So, by word of warning, just a quick warning up front so you know what you're getting yourself in for. Unfortunately, Sam has virtually locked the doors so you can't escape. But this presentation does contain, unfortunately, quite a lot of charts. But it's one of those ones where they'll give you all the slides afterwards, so don't worry about making any notes. It's probably not going to change your life, but it might make planning a little bit easier. You never know. I should caveat that just in case our legal team might say it hasn't done. Anyway, that's that out the way. So, here we go. So to start off, most good marketing presentations start with a good quote from someone. I'm not necessarily saying this is a good marketing presentation, but Steve Jobs, back in 2007, he stood up on stage and he held up the iPhone and he said, every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along and it changes everything. And I think, when we think about it, we think the smartphone, the world of digital media has really, really evolved and changed, and it has reshaped the way we do things, and it's changed things immeasurably. And as Darren Day said back in 2017, it's been a real experience. The last few years of what's been going on, it's been a real experience. But actually, I question, has it though really, Darren, or has it, Steve? Because despite everything, I wish I could tell you things were different, but I'm going to argue today that they're probably not. There's a sad face there. So what we did within Touchpoints is we looked at the patterns of video, audio, text, and out-of-home based media across the average day, and we looked at that from 2005 to 2020. And what we actually found is every single time we looked at these media in these combination categories, the patterns of media didn't really change at all. So from 2005 to 6, evolution, Steve Jobs, smartphone, everything changing. People are still doing pretty much exactly the same thing. Bit of audio in the morning, then they go out of home, they get their text, news-based content, and they're probably watching some sort of video in the evening. Of course, when we had the lockdowns happen, we saw some changes in this. We saw the shift of that drive time audio peaks. They're shifting to a bit more in the middle of the day. We saw more video viewing in the middle of the day. Naturally, out of home shifted and changed according to that kind of period there. And then now we've had this huge, unprecedented level of change, innovation, whatnot. And pretty much what we've done is reverted back to what we used to do before. Of course, there's a couple of things there. Out of home, slightly different shape, and that's purely driven by the fact that obviously most people aren't necessarily in the office 5 days a week as they were previously, and that kind of shifts those things there. Watch a little bit more video in that lunchtime, but apart from that, we've pretty much reverted back to where we were. So whether or not it's been a huge innovation, I'm not sure. And one of the reasons I think we haven't necessarily seen sort of substantial change and shifts is a quote from one of my heroes, the great Deborah Meaden. And she said, the number one thing you don't want users to have to do is to think, because when they think, they then talk themselves out of it. And thinking about the things that we did when we were in the lockdown period, at first when someone said, do you want to do a Zoom quiz? Brilliant, something to do, yes, absolutely. And then as time goes on, if you look at the evolution or the popularity of the Zoom quiz, it kind of goes down and people go, I don't really want to do a Zoom quiz. Do we want to do a Zoom? No, we don't want to do a Zoom. And all of these things that we kind of took up in that period there when everything was unprecedented, we now go, I'm not so sure what worked before, and then we kind of revert back to there with a little bit of additional tech. There's Deborah going off. So let's start by busting a couple of media myths. So that's myth busting there. Commercial media is dead. You know, it has no capability to reach people anymore. Well, back in 2015, 66% of all media consumption was ad-funded commercial versus 34% subscription, BBC, etc., non-commercial. So with all of this change, innovation, mass rising of subscription services, it has barely changed at all. We're at 63% is now commercial. And the idea, of course, is that younger people, 16, 15 to 34s, they don't use as much commercial media. They're impossible to reach behind these paywalls on these Spotify premiums and these subscription services. Well, back in 2015, 76% of their media time was commercial, and that's only dropped to 64% today. So there's really some fantastic opportunities there. So that myth's out the way. The only media that matters is digital. So the only kind of delivery mechanism that you should be focusing on is digital. Where we look at this in terms of internet connected versus non-internet connected versus non-internet connected media, the split there was 58, 42% back in 2015. And then when we look at that in 2023, we're over 52% now. Well, we're over 50%, sorry. But we still have a huge amount of media that is delivered without the connection to the internet. Of course, for 16 to 34s, 59 to 41%. And then today, it stands at around 20% is delivered in non-digital or traditional format. That's that one gone. So one of the things we find is, you know, when we think about looking at data and we look at all adults and we look at averages, and Rory Sutherland said, you know, if you plan for averages, you'll plan for no one because you'll create this kind of version of a person that doesn't really exist. I'd say absolutely. What I've actually found when we look at the data is not necessarily planning for no one, but if you plan for an average adult, what you actually hit is the 35 to 54s perfectly, and then you don't really hit the 16 to 34s or 55 plus audience at all. But what's quite interesting when we look at the data for all adults is we now find that live TV, social and online actually account for 67% of all commercial media time when we look at the kind of the curated or content-driven media. And despite the massive growth of mobile, we still find that TV set dominates in terms of the overall device for commercial media delivery, and that's all forms of media, commercial media by device. They're 41% back in 2015. Massive growth in mobile, but largely seems to be at the expense of PC, laptop, and smartphone growth there. And often we hear this kind of narrative that this media is dying, you can't achieve reach with any of this properties or whatever anymore. But what we often find is actually when one media declines in its, say, traditional or non-digital format, we see growth in the digital there, largely offsetting it. We see, say, a small decline there in commercial live recorded TV and quite substantial growth in commercial BVOD and commercial SVOD. And one of the interesting things, this is a chart that we do every year looking at the kind of the mean hours per day of all media and then the weekly reach as well. And we find, you know, the focus has always been, I always say that the Lesbianet area, the top right, he always talks in his publications, you know, the top right as being the largest drivers of very large business effects there, out-of-home commercial live recorded TV. But in many regards, that's also kind of the efficiency area. That's where it's going to deliver the kind of the largest amount of coverage for the lowest overall cost per cover point. But actually, in terms of understanding media effectiveness, it's a really focusing, I think, a bit more in the lower left-hand corner there is a really good thing to do. And TV, obviously, in terms of the overall reach of the different platforms that we find, TV certainly does still deliver scale with 2 out of the top 5 reaching platforms, channels there being TV. And when we break down the increasingly complex world of video, what we find for all adults is back in 2005, it was fairly easy to achieve kind of substantial scale with just live or recorded TV. And we only needed, say, 5 platforms to reach 99.5% of the population. Now in 2023, we need more platforms, and also the share is being taken by live recorded TV is quite a bit lower. And one of the things we also find is that media behaviours are really diversifying across age groups. And when we look at those kind of 16 to 34s versus the 55 plus audience, back in 2015 there was a 44% similarity in the media properties that they were using in terms of reach, and that's stayed there to about 42%. But during those lockdown periods, what we found is the kind of increased polarisation where people were gravitating towards the media that worked for them in terms of 16 to 34s and 55 plus. And then we saw, just after the lockdown, we saw kind of the impact of the large digital uptake by the 55 plus, which has kind of leveled off to back where we were. And one of the things we also find is that even if they're using the same platforms, they're not using them in the same way. So in terms of the time spent in the similar platforms, 58% dropped way down there to 8 or 9% during those lockdown periods. And it hasn't really come up, standing at just a 10% similarity. What we often see is that younger people are using social much more as somewhere to go in, browse, spend time, and kind of socialise, if you will, whereas TV is more appointment to view, and it's really the opposite for the 55 plus audience. And I'd say if you plan for polarisation, the truth will be somewhere in between. So for 16 to 34s, when we look at this audience, quote from Rod Stewart there, "Youth's a mask, but it don't last." But I mean, Rod's looking better than ever these days, so perhaps it does last, but never mind. Anyway, so what we find here is that social is the largest driver of reach and frequency. And you're probably looking at these charts going, I already know that. They're not really telling me anything new here. And that's a good thing, because I often find if data tells you something that you don't already instinctively know, it's probably wrong. So hopefully this kind of aligns with what you're already expecting. We also find that total mobile, so including smartphone and tablet together, accounts for 55% of all commercial media delivery for 16 to 34s. And again, we are seeing their strong digital growth offsetting those non-digital declines that are going on. And I'd say that there's a healthy landscape of commercial opportunity, both digital and non. So just focusing on the digital side will mean that there's some really, really great opportunities within the 16 to 34 market, which could be missed. And there's so many social platforms and so little time. So all five of the top reaching media properties for 16 to 34s are all social or online video sharing. So 55 plus, one of the things I would say for the 55 plus audience, you know, often this is a really, really overlooked audience. And I think this is one of the biggest missed opportunities in media that we see today, is kind of is missing out on what the 55 plus audience, their media usage and what they have to offer. What we find in 2015, that TV was the screen of dreams. 53% of all of their commercial media consumption was commercial live or recorded TV. And we would imagine that that's changed quite drastically between 2015 and the most recent data which we've got. When we skip forward, it's only lost 1 percentage point in the last 8 years in terms of the share taken by commercial live or recorded TV. So if you're over-investing in other media which may work for certain other audiences and missing out on, say, for example, here, TV investment, you may be missing a really, really big trick. Mobile first, as we often talk about, well, actually it's mobile second by quite a long way there. And we see that the growth of the TV set as a media delivery device for this audience, for commercial media, has gone from 52 to 57% there. And we've seen the growth of mobile from 6 to 13% in terms of media consumption for the 55 pluses. And normally you'd need to be watching Monty Don on Gardener's World to see this much growth. There's Monty. He's coming up there. But look at this, look, fantastic. Commercial BVOD is up 115%, news brands online is up 18%, social media 40% up. You know, commercial online news 284%, magazines online 155%. There's a huge opportunity here. Commercial SVOD, I think, is a fantastic opportunity for the 55 plus audience. This is an audience that already watches a lot of TV, is very used to seeing ads in their media environments, quite comfortably so, and actually are more likely to be price conscious and looking for something that's going to really work for them. So I think there's really good opportunities for growth going on in this area here, and also just seeing those offsets. But they are still very, very substantial levels of scale within this audience. Right, and they are the polar opposite of 16 to 34s in terms of their top reaching media channels here. So there we see 4 out of the top 5 being TV channels, and matter of Facebook making up the fifth one. So, there we go. So in a nutshell, what have we seen today? Well, the last few years have been a real experience, as Darren Day said early on, but very little has changed in terms of the patterns of media consumption now that the dust has settled. Commercial media, don't worry, it is alive and well. It's 63% of all media consumption, and I think that's a figure that's going to likely grow further with Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime all switching to those part ad-funded offerings. There's some very exciting opportunities going on there. 52% of commercial media time may be delivered digitally, but that does still mean that 48% isn't delivered digitally. So it's not delivered with the requirement of an internet connection for 48% of that media. There's no such thing as a dying media. What we're really seeing is those transformations in line with technological advances, and it's going to vary greatly by life stage, but most people just want to keep doing the same things they were already doing, just in a way that's maybe a little bit more convenient for them. I'd say plan for effectiveness, not necessarily efficiency. And I would say also that 55 plus represent one of the biggest missed opportunities in advertising today. And lastly, I'd say trust your instincts. If data seems to be telling you something revolutionary, it's probably wrong. I've made this mistake many times where I've thought, there's a fantastic thing I've just discovered here. And then my colleague would go, yeah, you've not run that correctly. And they go, oh, that's annoying. Never mind. Anyway, it's probably wrong. At least take it with a smiley face. It's good to make mistakes, and that's how we all learn and grow, as I've found over the years. So thank you very much indeed for listening. I'm out of time. There's the report, ipa.co.uk/making sense, and I'm going to hand back to Sam now. Thank you very much.